This is the answer we've been waiting for. Thanks to this chapter, we now know exactly how to cure someone who's been afflicted with Domi Reversi, meaning that Emu's greatest weapon in this war, the one thing there was no real answer to, something that at any point could shift the entire tide of battle in their favor, is no longer a real threat. Because all it takes to counter it is someone or someones with incredible strength, preferably someone with a very strong cock, not too squeamish about blood, and is okay with taking a life. Something that admittedly our main cast aren't exactly known for doing, but we do have at least one member of the crew, the one who was the first to discover this weakness, that doesn't mind getting their hands dirty. And look, this is not an exaggeration. If utilized right, this could completely eliminate any advantage Emu has in this upcoming war. Or I guess we should really start saying current war. I mean, not in the actual flesh, if our Silhouette King even has any, but through Gunko, Emu has now personally touched down and invaded an enemy nation with the intention to conquer, has all but announced themselves and intentions to their enemies, and is moments away from being face to face with Luffy, who will unwillingly be the leader of the opposing army. For us readers, this war has already started, the characters are just now catching up. But ever since we saw Rox D. Zebek, one of the most powerful pirates in recent history, definitely one of the strongest conquerors in the last century, be turned into one of Emu's demonic soldiers through Domi Reversi, the question's been stuck in the back of my mind of who else might be. Shanks, Zoro, Sanji? If someone with as strong of a will as Rox could fall to this, then realistically, anyone could. With Luffy and Loki being the only two currently in this arc that I think are mostly safe from it. And I'll get into why in another short video I have planned, but basically, let's just say there's something that those two have that most others don't that will make Emu overpowering their will a bit more difficult. But before we get to any of that, I want to take a quick second to talk about Frankie. More specifically, Frankie, Bonnie, and Lilith. Because like I mentioned in my last review for chapter 1175, the last time we saw our favorite cyborg was all the way back before the flashback in chapter 1148. And that was only a very brief panel where we saw him fighting an off-screen opponent as Ripley dashes past him in order to go join the other giants in rescuing the kids. And before that, we got very similar brief appearances of all three, spread throughout chapters 1144, 46, and 47. Frankie, Lilith, and Bonnie have been sorely underutilized throughout this entire arc, so you can imagine my excitement when we actually open a chapter to the three of them. And not only did we open a chapter with them, but with Lilith basically introducing Frankie to his next major power-up. Because we see the three of them back over at the box that Lilith brought with her in order to bring Vegapunk back to life, which, funny enough, is actually pretty close to the school. So despite the fact that we haven't seen them in over 20 chapters now, really, they've been close by the entire time. But we see her pull out these weird disc things that she calls Omni Drain Converters, or ODCs for short. And basically what these do is that they absorb one source of energy and convert it into a supercharged form of another. We get to see it in action firsthand after the rest of the crew's attempt to put out the fires engulfing both the school and library get very rudely interrupted by Killing Cam in one of his nightmares, with the nightmare just straight up eating Zeus, turning this into yet another rescue mission. But once that happens, Lilith sends the ODCs flying from the forest, which absorb the heat from the flames coating the two buildings, turning that fire into ice. And as the ODCs start to take in more energy, they go from being these flat discs that almost look like frisbees with knobs attached to them, into these round containers that you can actually see the energy swirling around inside. Then she converts the energy they took from the fire and transforms it into what she calls Super Vega Cola. A cola that's so explosive that it actually looks like it's going to burst out of the bottle she hands to Frankie. And once he drinks it, his body becomes supercharged, boosting his power by like 300%, allowing him to jump so far in the air that at first I thought he was using some kind of jetpack to fly up. Then we get to see firsthand just how much of a power boost this new cola actually gives him, as he and Jinbei go into a combo attack to take out the Nightmare and rescue Zeus, with Jinbei giving the big snake a good old punch to the gut that reverberates throughout his entire body, making the air inside of it push Zeus upwards from his stomach towards his head, and then Frankie giving her crew's new mascot a wide open exit out of the Nightmare by punching his head clean off. And look, I might be reading a bit too much into it, but it feels like Oda is implying here that when fueled by this cola, Frankie gets a major power boost that puts him on par with Jinbei. And that's without using General Frankie, which was already basically his version of a transformation, so imagine just how much more powerful that'll be when powered up by this new fuel source. This is exactly the kind of development we were hoping we'd get from Frankie back on Egghead, to learn something from Vegapunk or one of the satellites that would either help improve his own power or make major improvements to its technological knowledge. And although it may not be in the arc that we expected, this might actually lead to a much more interesting development for the crew cyborg. Because back when we first touched down on Elbath and Lilith announced that she'd be staying behind in order to develop the tech she'd need to bring Vegapunk back, admittedly, that raised a few eyebrows. I mean, there's not going to be a place she can go to that's as technologically advanced as that kid was, but given how little tech existed on this island, you'd basically think anywhere else would be a better choice. But as it turns out, the lack of technology on the island was never a problem because she could just simply create whatever device she needed in order to do whatever she wanted to do. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if in a month she had a whole section of the island looking like a slightly less advanced version of Egghead and had moved the giants forward in science by like 100 years. Actually, take that back, more like 1,000. And it's all because of energy. Something that, according to Lilith, Elbath has an overabundance of. Maybe it's due to everything on this island being somewhere around 100 times larger than every other island in the world, but the natural resources produced here, like wind, water, fire for example, seemingly have a much larger output of energy than they normally should. So say that a normal bolt of lightning produces enough energy to power a single house for an entire day on any other random island in the world. A bolt of lightning from a cloud on Elbath could seemingly power that house and every other building in that entire city for a whole week. My calculations may be off on that by a bit, math was never my best subject, but the point still stands that just like everything else on this island, the natural energy produced here is gigantic. Which is why the cola that Lilith gives him is so supercharged, and before the arc is over, we'll likely see Frankie stock up on a couple of those to take on the road, to be like his Hail Mary power up when he's really in a pinch. Not that he's ever really been in one post time skip, almost all of Frankie's fights have been basically one sided since Fisherman Island, with I'd say Senior Pink being his hardest fight yet, but even that I think he could have won much sooner than he did, he was just kind of vibing with the guy. But the Vega Cola isn't the only thing he's going to get out of his time with her, because Lilith is essentially teaching Frankie to pull in energy from those natural resources and turn that energy into a much stronger form of Cola. That way, sort of like Sanji with the raid suit, once Frankie runs out of the Vega Cola he gets from her, he can utilize what he's learned to create his own new form of Cola to power not only himself, but also the Sunny and all of his inventions. And hey, with Nami and Zeus on the crew, he's got a free form of super powerful natural lightning that he can pull from at any time. Well, okay, not free, because nothing for Nami is ever free. It's going to cost him a pretty berry every time he asks for their help. And speaking of Nami and Zeus, while the two ended up not getting much done this chapter due to the very rude interruption from Killing Cam, I do like the initiative they took at the start here, jumping in without hesitation to try and put out both fires before too much damage had been done. Same with Jinbei. All throughout this arc, fans have been voicing their disappointment in him for not really doing much of anything, especially after being so easily captured by Gunko early on. So this chapter was a great way for him to remind everyone why he is number 4 on the crew in terms of raw power and fighting ability. Because even without Frankie punching the head off the Nightmare, his punch still had enough force behind it to make the snake spit up Zeus. And I very much doubt the snake was going to be getting up right away after that hit. Sanji also steps up in a major way, and he gets to take the claim as being the first between him and Zoro who lands a hit on one of the God's Knights. He's not the first Straw Hat to do it. Dad, funny enough, goes to Usopp, who managed to nuke Gunko's upper half before they were captured. But he's not competing with Usopp. Sanji is only competing with Zoro, and this is one competition that he can definitely say that he won. Anyway, really, the only two who don't do much of anything in this section of the chapter are Robin and Usopp, counting only the official members of the crew obviously, because if not, then we'd also have to extend that to both Bonnie and Saul. But Robin gets a pass for two reasons. A, she's basically reliving her trauma all over again right now, so mentally she's not really in a position to be much use in a fight. And B, she had a great showing earlier on against Summers while everyone else was tied up, so really, she's already done her part here. But Usopp just continuing to yell while everyone else puts in the effort to solve the problem here, I just know isn't going to sit well with the fans, especially given how for the longest time the Elbaf arc was built up as being his time to really shine in the spotlight. And look, even I'm not saying that I'm enjoying Usopp here at the moment, but I will say that there is still plenty of arc left, and I expect that he's going to get a huge moment sometime before this all ends. But going back to Killing Cam for a sec, it really seems like Oda is trying hard to make up for the lack of hate we had for him at the start. Because the Killing Cam we first met and this one right here are two vastly different characters. Before, he seemed much more indifferent to the whole plot, almost like he didn't really want to participate in all of this. He even seemed a bit more friendly than most world nobles, given how well he treated Gunko, who at the time we didn't think was a world noble, even someone protecting her from Summers who seemed to enjoy poking a bit of fun at her. And as her plan progressed, and we saw him do more and more evil things in this arc, even getting a laugh at setting the library on fire after forcing Aj to do the same to the school, he still seemed like he was just going with the motion and not too invested in all of this. But the second he dropped his full Zoan form, it's like we're looking at a whole new character. Someone who's much more energetic and definitely much more into all the vile deeds that they're doing here. He even ends up going into a whole racist tirade about fishmen once he sees Jinbei, which I don't think necessarily disproves the idea that he might be a fishman, just that he hates them like all the other world nobles do. But the point I was trying to make is that it seems like his devil fruit being so tied to sleep and dreaming makes him more tired and less energetic the more of his dragon form he takes on, and then he's back to life the more he takes his human appearance. Basically, what I'm saying is, he's a prick. Which is why it made me extremely happy to see Sanji kick his head in here. And I guess this first hit here implies that Sanji's opponent for this arc is going to be Killing Cam, which, funny enough, I was calling for that to be the case early on in this arc, due to the Zoan user being very clearly the more powerful of the two potential opponents for Sanji and Zoro. And I felt like it was a good time for Sanji to take on the number 2 bad guy in an arc and let Zoro handle the number 3 for a change. But admittedly, as the story progressed, the more we saw of Summers, the more I was liking the idea of him being Sanji's matchup. I mean, all the setup is right there. Sanji is all about love and passion, and Summers is all about taking that love and passion, twisting it, and turning it into torture for his victims. It pretty much writes itself, but recent story progression has shifted things more towards the outcome that Sanji will be fighting Killing Cam. Luffy and Loki will take on Emu, and Zoro will be leading the charge against the demonized giants. Although that was prior to the ending of this chapter, where now I'm a bit more confused about what Oda's endgame is for good old Mashead in this arc. Because as we check in with the gang over at the village, they're still hacking away at all the giants that fell victim to Emu's Domi Reversi. Not really making much headway in that, due to the whole healing factor thing. But they do get some unexpected backup in the forms of the co-captains of the original giant warrior pirates, Dory and Bragi, who accidentally took out each other the last time we saw them when trying to unalive Zoro. Don't know why they even tried to aim for something that small. That's like swinging a sword to kill a fly. It's no wonder they ended up slicing each other up. But that ended up unintentionally having a good outcome, where Emu's control over them has been temporarily broken, long enough for them to realize what's happening, how much of a threat they were to their friends, and decide that they'd rather die than be controlled by the devil. And without hesitation, the two say their silent goodbyes to one another and then slice each other's heads clean off, killing them instantly, leaving Zoro and the other giants in shock over their deaths for about 5 seconds. Then the flaming circles that formed around them when they were originally turned reappear, flip them around again, and then boom, they're back to normal. Although it is hard to say whether or not Bragi's arm is fixed based on the way we see him at the end of the chapter. His arm looks shorter, but with the shield blocking our view, we can't say for certain. But this is the big reveal of the chapter, that killing someone who has been Domi Reversi'd reversed them back to their normal selves. So, going all the way back to the big fight between the demonic Zebek and Roger and Garp, that means their big combined attack at the end actually managed to kill him. Which is why we saw him back to normal in his final moments. And you know what? I'm just now realizing that Oda was telling us this from the start. Because throughout that entire fight, Zebek's will was begging those two to kill him. And now we find out that that's how you save someone from this curse. It's literally been right in our faces the entire time. But getting back to Zebek, my best guess is that when you revert back, your body is returned to the state it was in prior to being demonized, which is why I question whether or not Bragi still has his left arm. But other than that, the two were perfectly fine. That's why they're able to get up so easily here in this chapter. While in Zebek's case, prior to being turned, he was stabbed by multiple of Emu's tendril things, so when he returned to normal, he was still suffering from that damage. That's why he couldn't move and was an easy target for Garling. Or at least that's what it seems like the assumption we're supposed to make here is. Really, it just comes down to Oda taking creative license with these scenes to hit the story beats he's going for. But now that Dory and Bragi are back to their senses, the two giants get ready to lend their hand in taking out all of the remaining demonized giants alongside Zoro and the others, who are all just a little too excited about this. Like seriously, they have no concern over the fact that they're about to fight a lot of their friends. But this leads back to the question I had about Zoro's role in this arc, because coming out of the flashback with our heavy hitters down in the underworld gearing up to come back to the Sun Realm, there were a few options as to who would be fighting who, specifically who the Monster Trio would be fighting. And in Zoro's case, his options were both Dory and Bragi, Killing Cam, or Summers. But in the span of 3 chapters, we've eliminated 2 of those options, leaving killing him as the only viable answer. Oh, but wait, he's busy getting his head kicked in by the cook. So, as of right now, it seems like Zoro is going to be sidelined for this battle, only helping out and cleaning up the remaining demon giants. But there is still some hope, because even though both Luffy and Loki took turns embarrassing him in the last chapter, Summers could still get back up and potentially become an opponent for Zoro to fight, especially if the kids are still in the area, because targeting them will likely be his immediate reaction and give Zoro the chance to prove Luffy right that the kids are safe as long as he's there. Although honestly, I wouldn't be upset if it ended up being just a brief scuffle between them before Sanji and Zoro ended up switching opponents. But that's something we'll have to wait until future chapters to find out if we're ever going to get. For now, we should just look forward to seeing Emu's reaction to their greatest weapon in this war being so easily countered.